My name is Julie Halpert, and I'm a freelance journalist. Tim, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
I was interested in, I understand you're going to be talking about consumer attitudes towards wealth. And so I guess I just want to open by saying, what are some of the interesting findings in this area that you've seen that you think people would be interested in knowing about?
Sure. And again, I'm Tim O'Mara with the Nationwide Retirement Institute. And we've recently done a survey of over 1,000 people. And ironically, when we look at retirement, we're naturally talking to folks who are approaching retirement or in retirement. And we specifically are talking and looking at the impact of healthcare. Our recent survey, however, we did a different demographic. We looked at 25 to 45-year-olds, and they exactly have the same concern, but current healthcare, not future healthcare. So we see healthcare costs impacting all age levels and all age kind of stages of retirement.
And what were some of the interesting findings you discovered among this age group? You said that there's the same concerns, but what are some unique aspects to this particular age group?
The biggest thing is the unplanned out-of-pocket cost that even their insurers won't cover. So it could be something that is in it's something that happens to them, but they go to their insurer and the insurer say, well, that's not part of what we cover, or they need some extra care that they can't get through their employer. And then the other trend that we see is the adoption of the HSA platforms, which require a high deductible plan. And a lot of those younger folks were not ready to say, well, if my only option is the high deductible plan, I wasn't even planning on having that kind of cost outlay. So it's impacting them and their savings as well.
So, what was the purpose of your study? Is it to? Why don't you tell me a little bit more about what you hope to get out of this? And
Yeah, sure. Again, because our trend over the past probably 15 years has been looking at the pre-retiree and in-retiree as far as healthcare, but we wanted to kind of step back again and say, we're doing a very good job of addressing that through the advisor world and through the information that we do with the Retirement Institute. But there's another group, again, because the trend in overall healthcare, as we know every single year, healthcare continues to go up and up and up. So we kind of took it down to a different demographic and said, okay, what are your concerns? And 79% of them flat out said it's just the pure cost of healthcare that's going to impact, number one, my savings or my budgeting currently.
any other interesting statistics from the study that people would want to know about?
Yeah, another big thing when we talk about the younger demographic and the high deductible is the fact of the HSA. How does it work? Should I be using it? If I do have it, how do I actually benefit from it? So the education around HSAs for that younger demographic is huge because if they can understand the HSA and how it works, it's going to be one of their best retirement planning tools versus anything. Because as we know, a 401k or an IRA, at some point there's going to be taxes pulled out of that. We're trying to educate people on HSAs being the only pure triple tax-free investment vehicle you can use, because at some point you're going to use retirement dollars to pay for healthcare. We just want everybody to understand HSA is going to be one of the best vehicles to do that with.
And for those who may not be familiar with that, can you explain what the HSA is?
Sure. HSA is your health savings account, which is a pre-tax account where you can earmark money to go into a specified account. So it looks and feels like a 401k contribution. So there is a limit per individual. There is a limit per family. So as we sit there and say, okay, an individual can put in roughly $3,500, family, husband and wife can put in up to $7,000. It's pre-tax into the HSA. You actually have investment vehicles you can put it in, whether it be bond funds, mutual funds, or whatever vehicle they have inside there, again, looking just like a 401k. But then once you have a qualified healthcare expense, you can actually then take that money out by showing the receipt and getting reimbursed at full without ever paying tax. So if you think about someone, let's say early 40s, mid 40s, they can actually fund this for several years and then have an account that at whatever time, whether you want to pay Medicare premiums, some of your Medicare premiums can be paid, or anything out of pocket for healthcare, you can now tax-free pull that money back out.
And at what age does someone ideally start one of these accounts?
Well, we, I would tell anybody at whatever age is available, because again, once you're working and your employer has the high deductible plan, because that's the one tie-in. To have an HSA, you must be participating in a high deductible plan that allows you to contribute to the HSA. So we tell everybody it really doesn't matter what age. If you're able to put some money away and just let it keep growing, it's going to be the same kind of program with a 401k. We tell everybody earlier is always better. Put the money in, let it grow for as long as you possibly can, because then once that growth is there, again, it's going to be able to come out tax-free for them. So it's really not at what age, but at what time do you have the money that you can actually put into the HSA? And time would be your friend, so the earlier the better.
So the reason I ask that is that this younger generation, the group that you have profiled here, facing a lot of significant debt, student loan debt. Many of them don't even have jobs that offer benefits. Their first jobs, even sometimes into their early 30s, are gig economy. And I'm just wondering, how does someone like that, who's just scraping to get by, do something like this? Is it unrealistic for a lot of young people?
I mean, unrealistic if you don't have the money to put in, then it's going to be unrealistic, right? And if you don't have the actual benefit, because not everyone offers the high deductible HSA combo, some do, but if you don't have it, then naturally it's kind of the same as a 401k. That's why I keep kind of comparing them. If you don't have the money to put into it, then what we tell them is as soon as you can, fund it as soon as you are able to. The other thing we tell them too is if you're funding a 401k, here's a kind of unique twist. If you're funding a 401k, reduce your 401k contribution and divert some of that. It's the same dollar amount per year. So if someone says, I can only afford $8,000 putting in pre-tax, well, put your full $3,500 into your HSA and leave the remaining $4,500 in your 401k, because they're going to work and feel exactly the same, right? You're going to have an investment, you're going to have growth, but back to my point, at some time, your retirement dollars are going to be used for healthcare. So now you have part of it still growing, but coming out tax-free. So we do educate people. You don't have to contribute more, just divert what you're actually contributing.
Got it. That makes a lot more sense. Anything else you wanted to mention in terms of interesting findings, perhaps things people may not realize, or things that surprised you, anything you feel like people should know about?
Well, I mean, if you look at the whole demographic that we deal with, I think one of the big trends that we see is when someone goes to retire, so kind of moving from the 25 to 45 generation, but the pre-retirees, a lot of folks are looking at this magic retirement age of 62. They're like, well, my Social Security can be turned on. I can start getting a check and I can stop working. But we have a 3-year gap that people don't realize that they're going to run into. Meaning, if you want to retire at 62 and turn on Social Security, I have to ask you, are you going to stop working? If that person says yes, then the next problem we have is, well, how are you going to pay for health care until you're 65? And they're like, oh, I can afford it. And then when you quote them $1,200 to $1,500 a month per individual for health care, they're like, I can't do it. So now the trend is moving from, I want to retire at 62, I got to bridge that 3-year gap and get to 65 because now I can rely on Medicare. That's a big shock to a lot of people. And the reason that is because in the private sector, only about 15% of employers, small, medium, large, and international companies, will even offer a retiree healthcare benefit. Most of them say, if you're done working here, we're done covering you.
Anything that you found that this younger generation views differently than the older generation? One thing I hear a lot about is that the younger generation is much more interested in starting to save for retirement than their parents were. Are there any, first of all, is that true? And also, are there any other generational differences that you see?
Well, yeah, because it is a little different because, and I'll kind of phrase it this way, there was a study done and they polled the younger generation and said, how many people want to plan for retirement? And probably less than 50% said they want to plan for retirement. But then we rephrased the question and said, how many people want to be a millionaire by the time you're 60? And they all wanted to. So what we kind of see is their idea of the retirement is getting better because they can see over time how much that if they put it in now, how much it can grow. So their attitude is changing for the better, and we're seeing more participation in the 401k and the savings plans.
Okay. What would you like people to take away from this information? What is the goal of the information you've accumulated? What message do you want to convey?
Well, I think at the Nationwide Retirement Institute, our goal is to help Americans prepare for and live in retirement. And again, I think what we're doing a good job of shifting that preparing for retirement, not looking at the over 55 group. We got to come down with the different tools and different education and a different ability to save for retirement. Look how we can kind of tackle that healthcare problem, number one. How can we counter the healthcare problem with either an HSA or saving for retirement? And I think you have to go out and it's never too early. It can always be too late to plan. So I think there's a lot of people that need to go out. If you have the ability to get some information through an advisor, through a financial planner, look at that. Make sure your 401k and your retirement plan is on pace. And don't ever forget, and we do a very good job of analyzing healthcare, understand healthcare and what those costs are and how they'll impact your retirement.
And do you feel this upcoming generation has unique challenges that might make it more difficult for them to accumulate the same level of wealth that their parents accumulated?
Well, we kind of mentioned it. The kind of entry level jobs, the ability to save, the cost just in general versus the cost. If you look back when my parents were working and even when I started working, if I was lucky enough to have a benefit, that benefit was probably subsidized completely by the employer. That cost, just because of the cost of healthcare, again, is being pushed to the employee. It's no different. The explosion of HSA is no different than the explosion of a 401k. When my parents worked, everybody had a pension check at the end. It didn't matter where you worked 30 years, they're going to give you a pension. You didn't have to worry about 401k or savings. They pushed that onto the employee by moving to the 401k platform. They're doing the same thing with healthcare now. So the struggles that they're going to have is I'm going to have to absorb more of the cost because the employer doesn't have to offer it, but they're going to have to sit there and say, I have to absorb more of that cost because my employer is not going to pay for it. So that's a big struggle. So we have to make sure we help them in understanding that going forward.
Great. Anything else you wanted to add that I didn't ask you?
No, I think just glad for. Thanks for having me. And again, if you have any concerns, I would. If there's any way that you can work with a financial advisor or work with a planner, even looking at the Nationwide Retirement Institute is online. We have different tools that can help analyze. You can look at HSAs. You can look at the Medicare analysis and also Social Security. Those are the three things that we want to focus on.
So a lot of young people think I don't have much money to manage. I shouldn't even be thinking about this or talking to financial planners. That's just something people do who have lots of money. I would imagine your takeaway is do this and do this early.
Yeah, do this and do this early. And even, there are great companies out there that have fantastic apps and websites too, where you can sit there and start your own savings plan. And but you have to start somewhere. That's what we stress to everybody. You have to start somewhere. And you got to start building it now, whatever you can as far as putting money in there. Whatever amount you can put in there is going to accumulate over time, which will get you to that level to be able to work with an advisor. But you have to start early.
Great. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.